Some people think having a gate means you're safe from crazy neighbors. Others believe a good fence makes good neighbors. But what I learned is that sometimes the most dangerous neighbor is the one who thinks they have authority over you when they absolutely don't. And that's exactly what happened when Karen Mitchell decided to wage war against someone who was completely untouchable by her. Precious HOA rules. The whole thing started on what should have been a peaceful Tuesday morning. I was working from home, debugging some particularly stubborn code, when I heard heavy footsteps on my front porch. Through my window, I could see a police cruiser parked in my driveway, and my heart did that little skip it does when you see flashing lights. Even though you know you haven't done anything wrong, I opened the door to find Officer Rodriguez, a tired-looking guy in his 40s, holding what appeared to be an official complaint form. He looked about as thrilled to be there as I was to see him. "Mr. Thompson," he asked, consulting his notes. "I'm here about multiple HOA violations. Unauthorized landscaping, unapproved exterior modifications, and—" he squinted at the paper like it was written in ancient Greek. "Failure to comply with community aesthetic standards." I leaned against my doorframe and took a long sip of my coffee, making sure my voice carried across the street where I could see a familiar figure lurking behind her curtains. "Officer, that's really sweet of whoever called this in, but I'm not in the HOA." The curtains across the street twitched violently. "Sir, are you sure about that?" Rodriguez asked, his brow furrowing. "The complaint specifically lists your address as part of Willowbrook Commons HOA, and it's signed by the president herself." That's when I saw her. Karen Mitchell stepped out onto her perfectly manicured front lawn, arms crossed, watching our conversation with the intensity of a hawk sizing up a rabbit. Even from 50 feet away, I could see that smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Let me back up and tell you how this all started, because Karen's latest stunt was just the climax of months of escalating insanity. My name is Dan Thompson, and I'm a software developer who works remotely. After years of apartment living where I could hear my upstairs neighbors' every footstep and my next door neighbors' questionable taste in late-night reality TV, I finally saved enough to buy my first house. The place I chose was perfect, a solid 2-story colonial with a decent-sized yard and, most importantly, a location that was just outside the reach of any homeowners association, you see. I did my homework. I'm the kind of guy who reads the fine print, checks property boundaries twice, and keeps digital copies of everything. Before I even made an offer, I confirmed with 3 different sources that 427 Oak Ridge Drive was not, had never been, and could never be part of Willowbrook Commons HOA. The property line was crystal clear, and I had the county maps to prove it. Karen Mitchell didn't get that memo. I first met her on moving day. While I was hauling boxes from my truck, she appeared like she'd been summoned by some kind of new neighbor alert system. Clipboard in hand, wearing a smile that could have been painted on with house paint, she practically skipped over to introduce herself. "Welcome to Willowbrook Commons," she announced in a voice so aggressively cheerful it made my teeth ache. "I'm Karen Mitchell, HOA president. I brought you the new resident packet, membership forms, community guidelines, and our approved vendor list." I set down the box I was carrying and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Thanks for the welcome, Karen, but I'm not actually in the HOA. This property is outside your boundaries." For just a second, that painted-on smile flickered like a bad connection. "Oh, well, surely you'll want to join voluntarily. We have such wonderful standards here, and it really helps maintain everyone's property values." "I appreciate the offer," I said, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "But I specifically bought outside the HOA because I prefer to make my own decisions about my property." The temperature seemed to drop about 20 degrees. Karen's eyes narrowed behind her oversized glasses, and she clutched that clipboard like it was a life preserver. "I see," she said, her voice now sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, I certainly hope you'll maintain appropriate standards anyway. We wouldn't want any unsightly situations affecting the neighborhood." She turned and marched back to her house with the rigid posture of a general who'd just been told her army was fake. I figured that would be the end of it. I was so incredibly wrong. The first month was actually peaceful. I set up my home office, got my internet running at optimal speed, and started working on the project. I'd been dreaming about for years, a proper vegetable garden. Nothing crazy, just some raised beds along the side of my driveway where I planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and a row of cheerful sunflowers. My immediate neighbors loved it. The elderly couple next door, the Johnsons, even asked for advice about their own struggling tomato plants. But I noticed Karen watching from her window like I was conducting some kind of suspicious activity instead of just watering lettuce. That's when the letters started. The first one arrived on official, Willowbrook Commons letterhead, signed with Karen's elaborate signature. It informed me that I was in violation of Section 4.7 of the Community Landscaping Guidelines, specifically, the prohibition against non-approved vegetation visible from public areas. I had 7 days to remove my garden or face. A fine of $75 per day? I actually laughed out loud. The audacity was almost impressive. I wasn't in her HOA, she knew I wasn't in her HOA, and yet here she was trying to flex authority she didn't have. I filed the letter away and went back to my perfectly legal tomatoes. But Karen was just getting started. The letters kept coming like a paper avalanche. By the fourth one, she was claiming I owed $450 in accumulated fines. The violations got more creative, too. Apparently, my garden hose was an unapproved color. It was green. My mailbox was positioned at a non-compliant angle. It faced the street like everyone else's. And my outdoor security cameras were creating an atmosphere of surveillance intimidation. I started keeping a file. Call it professional paranoia. But something told me I was going to need documentation. The real escalation came when I decided to repaint my shutters. The original color was this bland beige. That made the house look like it was trying to disappear. I chose a rich forest green that complemented the cream siding beautifully. It took me a weekend, and my neighbor Tom even helped with the upper windows. "Looks great," Tom said, stepping back to admire our work. "Really makes the house pop." Karen's reaction was immediate and unhinged. While I was at Home Depot buying mulch the next day, my security cameras caught her standing in my driveway, taking photos of my shutters from multiple angles and holding up paint swatches, like she was some kind of color compliance inspector. The dedication was almost admirable if it wasn't completely psychotic. The letter that followed was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. My shutters, Karen informed me, violated the community's approved color palette, which consisted of exactly 3 shades: desert sand, warm beige, and classic ivory. Forest green was apparently a jarring departure from community aesthetic harmony. But Karen wasn't content with just letters anymore. She decided to call in the cavalry. First came the code enforcement officer, a weary-looking guy named Martinez who seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We got a complaint about unpermitted structures," he said apologetically. "Mind if I take a look?" I showed him my garden beds, complete with the permits I'd properly filed. He made some notes, complimented my tomatoes, and left with another apology for wasting my time. Next was a building inspector, supposedly checking on unauthorized exterior modifications. Again, I had all my permits, all my documentation. The inspector actually seemed confused about why he'd been called out for shutters that clearly didn't require permits. Then came the health department, investigating reports of unsanitary composting practices. They found my small, properly maintained compost bin and left looking embarrassed. Karen was casting a wide net, hoping something would stick. But she saved her masterstroke for last. That's how I ended up with Officer Rodriguez on my porch, holding a complaint about HOA. Violations for someone who wasn't in the HOA. But this time, Karen had made a critical error. This time, she'd involved the police with what she had to know were false claims. "Officer," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "I can show you the property maps if you'd like. I can show you my deed, my title insurance, and 3 different confirmations that this address has never been part of any HOA. What I think you have there is harassment disguised as a complaint." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Sir, if you have documentation..." I invited him inside and spread out my file on the kitchen table. County maps showing property boundaries, deed information, correspondence with my real estate agent, even a letter from the county assessor's office confirming my property's status. The officer studied everything carefully. This is pretty clear-cut, he admitted. Your property is definitely outside the HOA boundaries. Do you know who filed this complaint? Through my window, we could see Karen pacing on her front lawn, clearly trying to eavesdrop on our conversation. I have a pretty good idea, I said. And, officer, this isn't the first time. I've been documenting months of harassment, false complaints to city departments, fraudulent violation notices, threats of legal action, all from someone who knows she has no authority over my property. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Would you like to file a counter-complaint for false reporting? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Tom from next door. Dan, you might want to know, Karen's been telling people she's expanding the HOA boundaries to include your house. She showed Janet some kind of amended boundary map at yesterday's board meeting. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. Karen was falsifying documents to make her fantasy seem legitimate. Told Officer Rodriguez about the call, and his expression hardened. Sir, if someone's been filing false documents with city agencies, that's not harassment anymore. That's fraud. Over the next week, I went into full investigation mode. I filed Freedom of Information requests with every city department that had received complaints about my property. What came back was stunning. Karen hadn't just been filing nuisance complaints, she'd been submitting forged HOA documents claiming my property was within Willowbrook's boundaries. She'd created fake board meeting minutes showing a vote to extend enforcement to adjacent properties. She'd even forged the signature of another board member on several complaints. Took everything to my lawyer friend Sarah, who nearly choked on her coffee when she saw the file. Dan, this isn't just actionable, this is potentially criminal. She's been defrauding city agencies and wasting public resources based on falsified documents. We drafted a cease and desist letter that laid everything out in legal terms. False reporting, document forgery, harassment, and fraud. I sent it certified mail and waited. Karen's security camera caught her opening the envelope on her front porch. Her face went white, then red, then purple. She crumpled the letter and stormed inside, slamming the door so hard I heard it from across the street. For 3 beautiful days, I had peace. Then Karen made her final fatal mistake. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, trying to rally support for what she called expanded enforcement actions against non-compliant adjacent properties. What she didn't know was that several board members had grown tired of her increasingly erratic behavior. Tom, who served on the board, filled me in later. She tried to claim you were destroying property values with your unauthorized modifications, he said. When we asked for documentation proving your house was in the HOA, she started stammering about filing errors and temporary expansions. Janet asked her point blank if she'd been acting without board approval. That's when I decided to make an appearance. HOA bylaws allowed non-members to address the board as guests, and I had plenty to say. Walked into that community center meeting room with a folder full of evidence and asked for 5 minutes to speak. Karen looked like she was about to have a stroke. He can't be here, she shrieked. He's not a member. Janet, who apparently was the only board member with any sense, calmly reminded Karen that guest speakers were allowed under their own rules. Presented everything. The forged documents, the false complaints, the wasted city resources, the months of harassment. I have documentation of 18 separate false reports filed with city agencies, I concluded. I'm prepared to file criminal charges, but I'd prefer to resolve this quietly with a simple agreement. Karen stops this harassment immediately. The room was dead silent. Karen's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. I was protecting our community standards. She finally managed to croak. The board wasn't buying it. Janet called for an immediate vote of no confidence. Karen lost 5-1, with only her own vote in her favor. But the best part was yet to come. The city had been conducting their own investigation into Karen's false reports. She received a formal citation for filing fraudulent complaints and wasting public resources. Any future false reports would result in fines and possible criminal charges. Then there was the professional fallout. Karen worked as a real estate agent, and word travels fast in that community. Several of her clients, having heard about her HOA antics, decided they didn't want someone with questionable judgment handling their largest financial transaction. Her broker called her in for what Tom described as a very uncomfortable conversation. The morning after the board meeting, I installed my favorite addition to the property, a laminated sign next to my mailbox that read 427 Oak Ridge, Drive not in Willowbrook Commons. HOA since 1987. Questions? Check the county records. It started a trend. Other homeowners outside the HOA boundaries put up similar signs. One neighbor made his look like a historical marker. Free territory, Estuary 1987. Another added a cheeky, trespassers welcome, HOA presidents prosecuted. Within a month, 3 more board members had resigned, citing Karen's toxic leadership as their reason. The new board president, Janet, made a public effort to clarify boundaries and actually issued a formal apology for the harassment. Karen kept her real estate job, barely, but lost all credibility in the neighborhood. The police flagged her for nuisance reporting, meaning any future complaints would be scrutinized carefully. The HOA banned her from holding any leadership position for 5 years. And the neighbor she'd harassed before targeting me, a military veteran she'd tried to cite for displaying an American flag, filed his own lawsuit. Last I heard, she paid $12,000 in damages and legal fees. Karen still lives across the street, but now she minds her own business. Occasionally, I'll catch her staring at my thriving vegetable garden from her window, but she keeps her opinions to herself. My security cameras caught her walking by my property line sign several times, reading it like she was trying to find loopholes in reality itself. And that, my friends, is how a clipboard-wielding tyrant learned that authority only works when you actually have it. The best part? My property values actually went up after all the drama died down. Turns out potential buyers love knowing they're getting a house that comes with built-in protection from HOA overreach. If you enjoyed watching Karen's power trip crash and burn spectacularly, smash that like button. It really helps other people find stories like this. And if you love seeing entitled people get served a reality, check with their morning coffee, make sure to subscribe for more true tales of neighborhood nonsense and satisfying payback. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.